Well, we certainly have gone down a bunny hole with Listo, but it's very handy because it allows us to talk about the code that's related to the key targets that we have been discussing. Most of all, we're going to be talking about networking. What classes have we seen that will help us with our networking? Well, there's none in there now, so we'd have to ask ourselves how we're going to make that happen. Next would be our graphical TUI. We've talked about using TK and TKI and TER specifically, so we know what we're going to be doing with the canvas. But more importantly, in order to get our first WAGILE activity done, or WAGILE One, we're going to have to do something with testing. No matter what we come up with, whether you use my code or you use your code, we're going to have to automate our testing, and I have some ideas as well as open source projects on that. Finally, to talk about how we can make sure that no matter whenever we change things, we can make sure to keep on running those acceptance tests over and over again, so the moment we break something, we'll know it and won't have any nasty surprises. So inspiration is what it's all about along these 4 lines. Anything outside of these 4 lines is out of bounds for WAGILE One. So with our Listo activity, we should go now to take a look at the classes of interest. In this case, everything in yellow. We have our console, of course. We beat that one to death. We've got our game. Yeah, we've seen that one. We got our game map. And the game map is interesting because we're going to have both a client and a server way of communicating the map back and forth. In other words, we're going to have to make a move on our client, or in our test case, over to our server, which might be on our own machine or maybe on a Raspberry Pi. We also got to therefore have a look at our sparse map, and those are probably the classes of interest, noting that the error when Enterprise collides with something might have a bunch of other errors that we're going to want to send back and forth between the client and the server as well. So igniting our imagination, then we should go ahead and look once again at the code to see if we can understand, where we can separate the client framework from the server framework, and have some interesting ideas on how we can do that. But more interestingly, how we might be able to move data between the client framework and the server framework, because we're going to have a lot of things on the client and the server that need to be communicating, and the best of these will allow that communication to happen without us even understanding they're communicating. What we're doing with StarTrek is nothing more than what you want to do with a UAV, and I'm going to prove it to you by the time we get to the networking section, certainly enough to change our displays. So our hacking special operations could include instance detection, whether I'm a remote object or a local object, and I think that would be more important than the fact that the objects are communicating and can be diagnosed in testing, just like a sensor on our computer or a sensor on a Raspberry Pi or a UAV overhead. So we're going to have a polymorphic opportunity, perhaps, to put something in there called testable. Is testing, or can be tested, and make that a parent class who would put together a signature with a test case that takes an input parameter and sends an input parameter back to us so that we can do some diagnostics. Lots of interesting patterns that I'll be sharing with you that I have used in the real world, because as I'm fond of saying, I'm not a teacher who consults, I'm a consultant who teaches, and I think I might be able to hold you somewhat spellbound as we talk about applying some real-world techniques so as to create, or instrument, as we like to say, in our world, an enterprise from the point of view of the server, but most importantly, from the point of view of the client, who's going to want to get their telemetry from somewhere else besides what you might expect. In other words, not from ourselves, but from our servers. So let's get ready and take a moment to simply make sure we've checked out the code. We do indeed have hacked our way through our breakpoints and our reviews, and these pictures might help you get inspired to think about what you can do to make Hack-A-Track work better along and within the frameworks of networking, GUI, testing, and acceptance testing, which are the confines for our first WAGILE sprint, if you would, into our Hack-A-Track architecture review and inspirational brainstorming sessions.